Hi, I'm Lance Henriksen. You're watching Bryan Lomax Movie Talk. Don't turn it off.
Hello and welcome to my review of Batman Returns. Now, Batman Returns for me it kind of holds a special place in my heart. My love for cinema kind of really began with Tim Burton's first two Batman films. At one point, this film was my favourite film of all time. Of course, that's when I was like 12, 13, and my cinema knowledge wasn't quite as in-depth as it is now. So what is it like coming back to it now? I haven't seen this film for about a good 5 or 6 years, so I went back to it for this review. So what did I think? The first thing that hit me as this film began was just how beautiful it looks. The cinematography and the production design in this film are just fantastic. It's like a painting with light. Some of the uses of light, particularly down in the sewers and whatnot, is just beautiful. Half the time I wasn't listening to the dialogue or really paying attention to what was going on screen because I was just looking at the cinematography, at the lighting. Now, of course, it was the films, the Tim Burton Batman films, that got me reading the Batman comic books. So for me, my journey with Batman started first and foremost with those films. So I didn't really get bent out of shape like a lot of people did with regards to the liberties that Tim Burton took with the character. However, now, so many years later, being the Batman fan that I am, being immersed in the comic books throughout my teenage years and my early 20s, and obviously the new Christopher Nolan films, I can understand why a lot of people would not like this movie in particular, maybe not as much as the first one, but this one in particular is very much a Tim Burton film first and a Batman film second. Obviously, Tim Burton had such a success with the first Batman film that the studio had confidence in him and they gave him free rein. So what he created essentially is, as I say, a Tim Burton film. It's a fairy tale. He uses the Batman characters for his own means, and he creates one of cinema's most twisted monsters, I feel, in the Penguin. This is not the Penguin that we know from the comic books. It is a dark, twisted, vile creature that has just basically come out of Tim Burton's own mind. And for that kind of reason, I like it. And that's why I like this film in general. I was a very big Tim Burton fan in the 90s, not as much anymore, but this is one of the reasons, and I like the fairy tale aspect that he's brought to the Batman character. Now, you can take that or leave it. If you want to be a die-hard Batman fan and discount his films, that's fine, and I accept that, I understand it. But for me, I come to these films just as this is a particular director's take on a character, and for what he brings to it, I really like it. As I say, the villain of the Penguin is much more drawn out than a character like Batman. I think Batman becomes more of a cipher kind of character for the rest of the characters around him. One of those being Catwoman, Selina Kyle, as played absolutely brilliantly by Michelle Pfeiffer. Now, another thing, when I first got into this film in the 90s, I was 12 years old. I had such a major thing for Michelle Pfeiffer. Obviously, that's diminished over the years, but going back and watching this, I remember why I liked her so much, and it's primarily because of this role. She brings so much strength to this role, and so many aspects of the character. She, like Bruce Wayne, more so with Christian Bale's interpretation of Bruce Wayne, she's playing three different characters. She's playing the Selina Kyle who is ditzy, who doesn't have much strength, who's not very confident at work, although she is intelligent. And she's also playing the Selina Kyle who actually is the reverse of that, who's become empowered, who has realised that actually she's not going to let men kick her down anymore. And then obviously she's got the Catwoman role in which her voice, her intonation completely changes. And she just does a brilliant job with this character. She's the standout in the movie for me. And there's a lot to say in there with her character about society at the time, particularly more so then, maybe not as much now. Just about women in the workplace and the roles that women had in society. But the real villain of this piece is actually Christopher Walken's Max Shreck, a character that doesn't actually appear in the Batman comic books. This was made up completely for this film, and it's kind of a way of really drawing out the humanity in the other villains, Penguin and Catwoman, and not making them the ultimate villains so that you can still sympathise with them, whereas with Max Shreck you don't sympathise with him. He gets little moments of humanity, particularly, well, primarily towards his son. He feels very protective of his own son. That's the one time really throughout the film that we do get a sense that this guy is still a human being, but first and foremost he's the guy that we're to sneer at, the guy that we're to take as the main villain. He's the one playing everyone else off of each other. The screenplay for this film was written by Daniel Waters. Now he's responsible for Heathers, which for me is one of the best and darkest high school movies of all time. Unfortunately, he's also responsible for a more recent film set in a high school about vampires, which we won't talk about. But Heathers, yeah, is a great script, and he brings that kind of edge to this script. There's certain lines of dialogue that just feel very much like something you would find in Heathers, but now they seem a little bit dated. So some of the stuff in the film seems very dated. And what I will say as well is that a lot of the effects in this film also seem quite dated. Some of the penguin effects towards the end are just a little bit jarring. You watch them and you kind of like, ooh, yeah, could use a little bit more work. Another thing is the story itself seems to go off the rails a little bit towards the end, something that I never really paid attention to when I first watched it, when I was in love with the film. I think my love for the film kind of just pushed those plot points to one side and tried not to focus on them too much. But a couple of things about the film that just really grate on my nerves now when I watch it is Penguin getting hold of the plans for the Batmobile, the schematics for the Batmobile. No explanation is given for that whatsoever, and it's just it's a great plot device. I like the use of it, but it's thrown in there without any explanation as to how he would get his hands on them, and for that reason it really brings the film down a notch or two. Also, we don't really get action that is shot particularly well in this film. It's something that Tim Burton has never been particularly great at. He knows how to paint a scene, he knows how to light a set and just really make something look beautiful and fairy tale like, but the action sometimes just feels a little bit too stilted, and more so with this one maybe than even the first one. Danny Elfman comes back to give us another score, which I personally think is fantastic, arguably better than the first one, despite what I said in my video for the first one. Listening to this again, I do find myself drawn to this score a little bit more than I do the music from the first film. I love the chemistry in this film between Pfeiffer and Keaton. Whenever they're on screen together, I'm really drawn into what's going on. Batman on the whole, and Bruce Wayne to some extent in this film, are essentially the same character. Now, we see this in a meeting that Bruce Wayne has with Max Shreck, in which he's very kind of on the attack against him. There's none of the like, if you look at Christian Bale's interpretation of Bruce Wayne in the Nolan franchise, there's a very big distinction between how he plays Bruce Wayne in the board meetings and how he plays Bruce Wayne when he's interacting with Alfred. There's no real attempt there to hide the fact that this is two different characters. So for me, that was a little bit of a bugbear, but again, that's coming to it as a Batman fan, as a fan of the comic book iteration of the character. Putting all that aside, a lot of the faults in this film I can kind of step over still, even now as a Batman fan, because like I say, if you come to this film and don't think of it as an adaptation of the comic books, just think of it as a fairy tale interpretation of the Batman character, then I think you'll get a lot out of it. I certainly did, particularly with the visuals, as I say. I think it's beautifully shot, beautifully directed in that respect, and I still have a lot of love for this film. Watching it again this time round took me right back to my childhood. It took me right back to being that 12-year-old boy who saw it in the cinema for the first time, and I gotta say, despite the flaws, I still loved every minute of it. I still went along with it, and that could just be nostalgia. I've under no doubt that it is nostalgia actually, but whereas I would have once given this film a clear 10 out of 10, it, as I say, was once my favourite film, I think now looking at the flaws, in spite of those flaws, I would still give this a solid 8, maybe an 8.5 out of 10. But for now, an 8 out of 10. So in a world that has brought us Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, where does Burton's Batman sit for you? Do you like it or do you loathe it? Are you a die-hard comic book fan who really can't stand Burton's iteration? Or, like me, is it something you grew up with, something that got you into the character? Comment below, let me know, and until next time, thanks for watching.